This video is going to be dedicated to Tess from Bring Me the Books because I'm trying to get her into audiobooks since I love them so much and I feel like she would too. So this is mostly for her, but I hope you guys all enjoy. Hello my lovelies and welcome back to my channel. I'm Heather and this is the happenings with H.A.P. H.A.P. meaning my initials. So in today's video we're going to be going over my 5 favorite audiobooks. These are the best of the best to me right now. Obviously books are written and released pretty much every day, so I'm sure this list may change or it'll be added. I'm sure you've heard of most of them, if not all of them. So it's not going to be that much of a surprise. I read audiobooks more than physical books, so I have listened to a wide variety already. But I do have a lot of favorites, and if you want to see another episode part, I guess, sure, of this series, let me know down below. And while you're commenting below, feel free to like and subscribe because I want to grow this community. So let's get into it. The first book is The Perks of Being a Wallflower by Chbosky. I know I'm getting side eyes out there because a lot of people probably read this in high school and they probably read it in a physical form. I only came to this book probably 2 or 3 years ago, roughly, and I'm in my 30s, so I was well out of the typical age range when most people first read this book. And for that, I'm upset because I really wish I would have read this in high school. Now, on the surface, there isn't a whole lot of like production value with the audiobook that goes to this. The real heart of the book and the heart of the audiobook is the character of Charlie, who in the audiobook is portrayed by Noah Galvin. I'm not sure how old Noah was when he recorded this audiobook, but he sounds the age range of Charlie in the book, so probably mid to high teens. But his performance in this audiobook is truly wonderful. I went into this book knowing absolutely nothing about it, and I think that made it even better. And for those that don't know, and of course for those that obviously do know, the book is told in a series of letters from Charlie to an unnamed person. So essentially throughout the book, Charlie is talking to this unknown person, but basically he's talking to you. Everything is told to you. And when listening in an audiobook format, to hear someone talking to you, it provides a level of intimacy that third person narratives don't always get to enjoy. And as the novel goes on and Charlie's writing becomes better and he encounters the darkness of his past, I as the reader was left physically stunned. And I felt that Noah's performance as an actor, he was feeling the same things that Charlie the character was feeling. There was so much authenticity and rawness in his performance. And while I wish I had read this when I was more age appropriate to the characters of the book, I'm so glad that I got to experience it for the first time in audiobook format. And for those of you that have read this book and say it's been a number of years, a decade, or even just a couple of years, I recommend reading it again in audiobook format. There's a lot there that I feel reading it physically, you may not feel as much and you may miss. Like I said, this is a very simple, straightforward, one narrator audiobook, but it packs a powerful emotional punch, especially for those that know the plot of the story. You can imagine what that's like, but I don't want you to imagine, I want you to actually listen to it. Next up in the vein of solo narrated audiobooks, we have the You series by Caroline Kepnes, I believe is how you say her name. Now, I read both You and Hidden Bodies before I watched the Netflix series. If you guys want to know my opinions on the differences between the two, leave a comment down below and I will definitely make a video. I had heard people talking about the audiobook in particular and Santino Fontana's performance. Now, these books are written in a very rarely used second person format. So the you of the title is technically a character in the book, but the way the book is written, the you is you. So the entire time that the character Joe Goldberg is talking about this character, how you're hearing it is as if he's talking about you. And for those that don't know, in a very one-sentence summary, these books are about a stalker. So while listening to this, and I listen to a lot of my audiobooks on my commutes, to walk around New York City, which is where the book is set, And to have this stalker character basically talking about following you, watching you, being attracted to you, loving you, and all these things, it was wild. It's a very surreal audiobook experience. It's very similar in a way to Perks of Being a Wallflower, where the main character is talking to you, but he was talking to you through a written format, so it was very much formal and more detached. This, on the other hand, very much makes you kind of feel weird, especially as a woman listening to this. There is this very weird sense of feeling someone's watching you, even though obviously I'm not Beck, I'm not Love, I'm not any of these other characters in this book, but just hearing it in your ear it was just very surreal. And Santino has an amazing voice, and as a woman he has an amazingly attractive voice. And this is something I've mentioned in my June 2020 wrap-up, where as a woman I can see red flags. I know that Joe is dangerous and toxic and a criminal and all these things. However, listening to the book, you end up siding with him. You end up feeling desire for him in a way. Like, there were parts that I was getting a little like, not gonna lie, a little like, ooh, I'm a little turned on. I hate to say that because of the subject matter of the book, but the way it's written kind of manipulates your brain into that, and the audiobook especially manipulates your perception of this character. It's very similar to how the Netflix show has a very huge fandom of women that are attracted to Joe Goldberg despite the fact that he's a horrible person. He's trash. He's a stalker. He's a murderer. He's so many things. So it has the same kind of concept, but it's basically turned up the dial. If you've not read You and you've not read Hidden Bodies, but you have watched the Netflix series, I really highly recommend that you read the books, but in particular read it via audiobook. You'll get that same thrill that you get from the show, but in a different way and in a more intimate way. So like I said, this is just a solo narrative. It's just Santino Fontana by himself, but he brings Joe to life. And it was actually one of the bigger reasons why I was at first hesitant to watch Netflix series, because I didn't think anyone could do Joe like him. But Penn Badgley actually does an amazing job. I consider them equal because they actually sort of sound similar in a way too. But highly recommend this audiobook, especially if you love the show and if you love thrillers, and for the very strange second person narrative that it presents, because it's one of two books I feel like I can remember that I've actually read in that vein. So it's very rare and you won't be disappointed for sure. And apparently she's coming out with a third and fourth book. So as long as Santino is going to be Joe and narrate this book, I will be super happy because I'm going to be first in line for those books for sure. Next up, we have Radio Silence by Alice Oseman. Now, this one expands a bit beyond the solo narrator. We do have a narrator by the name of Aisha Kala, but this book also includes other narration. Essentially, this book is about Frances, who is a bookworm studying really hard to get into university. Her one outlet of joy is this YouTube podcast called University that she draws fan art for. Eventually, she finds out that the creator of this podcast is actually a boy named Alid who goes to her school. They end up becoming really good friends, and they actually collaborate over the podcast. I'm not going to go into too much more of the plot, but what makes this audiobook unique is that there are chapters that include narration from episodes of the podcast. And the way that the audiobook is produced, you actually get to hear what that narration sounds like as if the podcast were real. So you have the straight up narration by Aisha, then a chapter about the podcast. You have this very weird, creepy voice. So you actually get to hear the narration of this podcast. If I would have read the book in a traditional format, I don't think that the allure of the podcast would have really gotten to me. It really made the podcast come alive by being able to listen to what the characters were creating. And while the episodes presented throughout the narrative give little hints about the trajectory of the narrative, it is more or less a way, I feel, to make the book slightly more entertaining, because without those little episodes, it doesn't add too much until I want to say the later chapters, where the podcast episodes become more earnest. But on the whole, this was a really unique way of adding realism and adding atmosphere to a novel, especially in an audio format, because unlike TV, you have to use your imagination, but to have this presented in such a production and to have that podcast there really added to it. And I really enjoyed it a lot. And I don't think I would have enjoyed it as much if it was just written on the page. The next book on my list is Daisy Jones and the Six by Taylor Jenkins Reid. And I know what you're all thinking. Of course this one's on here because it deserves to be on here. This book blew up last year. Everyone was talking about it. And I've only read the audiobook. I've never read the physical book. And I'm thankful that I read the audiobook first. This book is written in an interview style format with members and family and tech crew of this band, Daisy Jones and the Six, and it's to uncover why this band that was so huge broke up in the 70s. The band itself in the book definitely gave me Fleetwood Mac vibes. I believe Taylor Jenkins Reid did say that she kind of got inspiration from their whole chaotic history as a band. And I remember when this came out, the opinions about the book were split completely in half. Some people adored it and other people despised it. A lot of the reason people didn't like it was that it was written in literally an interview format where interviewer asks a question, then you have blocks of text with the character telling their side of the story. So it's pretty much all told in first person by all the different characters based on the questions that they're being prompted. Now, this includes an entirely full cast. Every single character has their own voice actor, and a lot of them are really famous voice actors. Jennifer Beals, Pablo Schreiber, Benjamin Blatt, Judy Greer, and a bunch of other people, but those were probably the most famous ones. And for anyone that grew up in the late 90s, early 2000s, and would watch like the VH1 Behind the Musics, that's literally what this is. It is essentially a VH1 Behind the Music of this fictional band. So you have this caliber of actors, and obviously everything they're talking about is in first person. And if I didn't know that this was a false narrative, that this was just a fiction book, I would have assumed that this was real. The way it's acted, the way it's written, it doesn't sound like a script. It's that well done. And the audiobook literally makes the experience. I can see why people did not enjoy it as much in a physical form, because this was made to be an audiobook. This was made to be a TV adaptation. The book is essentially a script. There is narrative, but not much. And it's primarily just these characters speaking about their own lives in the first person. So the emotional impacts, the world building is really reinforced by the caliber of actors that they hired for this production. It's so well done, and I so loved it. And like I said, I feel like my love of this book was reinforced by the way that I consumed it. So if you've been hesitant to pick this one up, please do, and do it in audiobook format, because it really brings the book to a higher caliber. And it's now actually going to be adapted for television. Don't know when it's coming out, especially because of all the stuff that's going on in the world right now, but that is greenlit. It's already starting to be cast. So that's going to be happening, but I really suggest to read the book first. I prefer reading books first if I can, and since it's going to be a long wait for that adaptation, maybe give this book a try, because I think you'll really enjoy it. And now I saved the best for last, because I've yet to have a book that has hit me so deeply as this one did, and I 100% believe it was because of the audiobook format. And that book is Sadie by Courtney Summers. This is a young adult mystery crime novel. This book is set in a very rural, isolated small town, and it follows Sadie, whose younger sister gets murdered. And after the police investigation brings up nothing, she has a hunch, and she follows clues basically across the country in order to find out who murdered her little sister. Concurrently, we are also following Wes McCrae, who is a host and producer of this serial podcast that follows true crime in rural America. Now, West is about 6 months behind the storyline that Sadie is telling, and West overhears Sadie's story because now Sadie has gone missing in this current timeline. So we are then introduced to different episodes as he's trying to find where Sadie went and is uncovering clues about the murder, about her home life, about all the people that knew her. As in the past, Sadie is pretty much doing the same about following these breadcrumbs and trying to figure out where the murderer of her younger sister has gone. This book includes an entirely full cast of characters. They are led by Rebecca Soler, Fred Berman, Dan Bittner, and Gabra Zachman. What makes this book so amazing is you have the narrator of Sadie's side of the story, which is told in first person. And then you have these fully produced episodes of this serial podcast with the host as he's going around all these small towns and interviewing all these people. There are sound effects. There are different people that he interviews, completely different voice actors. It is a fully fledged podcast production in essence. Whereas you have the normal narrative structure of an audiobook with Sadie's story, the other section with the podcast is literally a fully realized podcast. The podcast, it's so fully realized that it literally could be any of the true crime podcasts that you would listen to at home before going to sleep. It is so fully realized and so fully real that it really did feel like what I was listening to was an actual crime case. And a trigger warning for this book for murder, pedophilia, abuse, drugs, all types of things. This book really does delve into the dark side of small town America and doesn't shy away from that, even though it is a young adult book. I 100% do not think that this book would probably be nearly as powerful if it were read in a normal physical form. This book is so far elevated because of the audiobook format that it's kind of now the gold standard of what an audiobook can be. And the way it's written obviously supports that, because without the writing we wouldn't have the audiobook. But the way it was written, I feel like it was written to simply be an audiobook or a radio play. The narrative structure just supports it so well. I can't really see someone getting the same amount of enjoyment, the same amount of shock and awe if they had just read it on the page. The voice actors that they got are not these polished, perfect speakers. You have characters of all different ages and they sound like they're from, small town America. Even in the actors incorporate these small town dialects that you would see on someone being interviewed on a TV news program. It's so realistic, and the commitment of the entire cast, from the littlest parts to even the sound guy who's making all these sound effects, is just perfection. And I guess I find an audiobook that has actually been able to surpass this one as my favorite. I know that audiobooks are not everyone's cup of tea, mostly because of being able to not pay attention to the book, it putting them to sleep. But I'd say if you were going to listen to any of these, and especially if you're someone that is not really an audiobook person, listen to this one. This one will either make you fall in love with audiobooks or will make you fall in love with this audiobook so much you might be turned off to other ones. Because while this whole video has listed some amazing audiobooks, they're not always all this good. Now, I'll be the first person to admit that. I've come across many that were very dull and probably ruined my reading experience. But Sadie, as well as all the others, are, in my opinion, some of the best in the industry. And over the past probably decade, this industry has kind of stepped up the game. These are separate costs and productions for these books. Back in the day, someone would just basically read it and there'd be no production value. And now there's production value. And the more people that read them, the higher that production value will become, because there's going to be more of a demand for it. So I'm one of those people that loves it. I find it a great way to pass the time, to pass the commute, to just enjoy a book in a different way. And also as a way, especially on BookTube, where sometimes quantity can be overwhelming, a way to get through books slightly faster. But all of the books on this list are, as I said, my absolute favorite, and I highly recommend them all for sure. That's it. I hope you guys enjoyed this video. If you have any audiobooks that you love that I failed to mention, please leave a comment down below. I'm always open to new audiobooks, especially ones that have the type of production values that I've mentioned in this video. But I also have a bunch of audiobooks that I did not mention, and I can always make a new video. So if you would like another video for this series, please leave a comment down below and let me know, and I will definitely create another video of some of my favorite audiobooks. So I hope you guys enjoyed, and I hope you have a great day, and until my next video, bye. In today's video, we're going to be going over the first book is Oh my god, I did not put that. Ah, I didn't. Jennifer Beals. Ugh. Okay, we are also following The Perks of Being a Wallflower. Ugh. The Perks of Being a Wallflower. Oh my gosh. The first book is the... I can't say this. Why can't I talk correctly? It's 1 in the morning. That's probably why.